Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here with us today. Some of you I recognize from being with us for Part 1. I know some people have watched Part 1 that's already up on the AbleNet University. Some of you I know from past ECT trainings. We want to welcome Jill Bill here, who's one of our ECT trainers from Texas. And I know a couple other names, people from ECT from the past. I see Mr. Dave Patel here from Pennsylvania. And from Florida, we see a group here from Carol Zangari's group. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. I also want to get us started here with some reminders from the first session about environmental communication teaching, our strategies in working with augmentative communicators, really setting the purpose for them to use whatever augmentative communication tool, whether it's an app, whether it's a device, whether it's a low-tech strategy, based upon setting their purpose for communicating with whatever's going on within your classroom, setting that environment. And today we're going to be really working on those partner strategies, working on pulling that all together with what in ECT we call activity-based objectives. And with all of those things pulled together, how you're going to be able to monitor and adjust that based upon data collection. Based upon using your raised hand functions, how many of you were able to be a part of Part 1 or watch Part 1? So we'll just use the raised hand function next to your name or up in that control part of the Ready Talk feature, just to get an idea of who's been able to see that. For those of you that are just learning about who I am, my name's Kelly Fonner. I'm a trainer and consultant in educational and assistive technologies. My background is as a special education teacher. I've always, as a part of my work as a teacher, as a parapro, as a trainer, I've always been involved with individuals with complex communication needs. There's that new term for those of you that are involved with people that use AAC systems, another new acronym, CCN, Complex Communication Needs. Get used to it because it's in all the publications and something that is being used as a part of our new vernacular. And again, Part 1 covered the first 3 steps of ECT, which was looking at activities as a foundation, preparing communication interaction, and arranging the environment. I'll hit on a couple of those steps as we go into Step 4 and Step 5. Thanks for putting your hands up there, everybody, so I had an idea of who watched that, so that we know who's on the webinar with us today. Gloria, or what we lovingly call her as Glow from AbleNet, is going to be monitoring your chat as you type into the chat function different questions that you have, and she'll throw those questions over to me that are based upon the content. She'll also be monitoring any of the things that you've got going on with the functioning of the Ready Talk, and we'll talk about the issues that people have with video. We've thrown video to the end of the session. Gloria will handle the audio questions that you're having. She knows how to handle Ready Talk. So if you can click here on who you are, what role you provide for students with special needs and that are specific to today's issue of individuals with complex communication needs. I think we've got almost all of the people are still clicking in. I know some of you are watching with multiple people logged in as one person, so you might have to do an average for your group. We need a couple more responses, and then I'm going to skip to the results here so everybody can get a view of who's on the call with us today. I really welcome this opportunity to put ECT out in the AbleNet University forum because people are always asking about it. It typically is a 5-day training that takes place throughout the school year where the trainers are working with teams in their classrooms as they are implementing the strategies. You get feedback based upon video. I know with some of the teams that I've been working with lately, we've been doing it virtually, where we do a webinar and then teams practice the strategies and then they send videos based upon Moodles, or we do secure Dropbox videos, and then I'll send feedback to people virtually that way, and we'll talk and have internet chats about what's going on as they implement the strategies throughout the school year. But that's not always an option for everybody. Okay, I'm going to skip to results here so you can see who we've got on the conference with us today. Again, our biggest group is always our speech-language pathologists. Welcome, welcome, everybody. And our teachers, our people that are our assistive technology specialists are always something else first, but then other duties as assigned put you into the AT resource people. And then everybody else that gets involved in augmentative and alternative communication. Kind of the questions that we're answering or hopefully giving you insight into today is that idea of how are you using data on the use of AugCom within your classroom. And this is, we might be introducing it kind of in the what do you do first order today. And are you making meaningful use of that data, or is it just filed away? The other thing that I often get concerned about is that are people just satisfied because kids are pushing a button to talk? Are you really looking at what's behind their use of the communication system? It isn't just a task to be done to just use their AugCom system, but are you really getting to a student's purpose to communicate? It shouldn't be our purpose, but it's really about their need to communicate in your classroom. Are they saying the things that they want to say in your room? Or are you just getting to your objectives about it? Is it really about their expressive communication at all? And that's really what we're trying to teach kids to be, communicators that they are, to be able to develop the person that they are. And we know that we have to demonstrate. We need to collect data on their demonstration of it. But part of that can be about how independent that they are. Are they initiating? And what's the range of communicative functions? That we don't want them just to be stuck in this land of requesting that so many people get stuck in augmentative communication. So you're going to be stuck in the land of Kelly Fonner-isms here today in this time that we have together. And the thing that you need to know is that whenever you attend any of these kinds of webinars, you do have to practice. It doesn't just come from attending the webinar. You have to put into place whatever any of the presenters are asking you to do, because otherwise it doesn't become a reality. You can read things in books. You can look at things that people talk about on listservs like Quiet, but you really have to try and put it into place in your practice. One of the things that I offer to people after you attend one of these webinars is that part of the handouts give you the worksheets that we use in ECT. Try those out. Today we're going to look at scripting, like some of the videos that you saw last time. We're going to attempt at 2 more videos this time and try out these things. And I welcome you to use the kinds of forms. Send them to me and I'll give you feedback on them. You don't have to be a part of the formal training. If you're trying them out, email them to me. My website's going to be up here. Send them to me and I'll give you feedback on them. Part of our steps, the first 3 steps in part 1 were the idea that activities set the context, not putting the device in front of a kid. Putting the device in front of a kid doesn't set the context for why they're communicating. What you're doing in the classroom is setting that context. For more of that, if this looks like new information to you, you need to watch part 1. But this is the worksheet that goes along with step 1. What are the kinds of activities? We know what are the 4 different kinds of activities, groupings that we can do. You can look at putting your schedule here and figuring out what's the best kind of communication that you can develop during the different parts of the day. And then, looking at what are the different kinds of communication and the kinds of communication that get promoted throughout the day. Step 2 was about what are you focusing on with your student? And it can be different focuses throughout the day. Sometimes we're working on expanding the vocabulary. Sometimes we're taking the vocabulary that they already have and developing language, because those are two different things. We're, adding vocabulary or using core vocabulary and developing language from it. Making sure that we're really working on multimodal communication, using their communication system, using the vocalizations that they have, combining that with sign language. Many of our students are multimodal communicators, and we need to acknowledge that and show them when is it good to use your voice and when do people not understand your natural voice and you need to go to your electronic voice. Too many students don't know when one is better than the other because people pretend to understand their natural voice, trying to think that they're being a polite communication partner, and you don't do your kids any favors when you're just being polite when you don't understand their natural voice. You need to go to their electronic voice. And when you have kids that you understand their natural voice, but they really do need to get out in the school into other environments where people don't understand their natural voice, you need to put them into those contexts. And then we have other activities that are built upon other purposes to replace those behaviors and to give them other replacement communication messages other than things where they might be doing self-injurious behaviors, staff-injurious behaviors, where they need to be communicating in ways that are socially acceptable ways to communicate. The other thing to put a big emphasis on is to expand kids' communicative functions. When we communicate within the context of a full activity, we communicate with many communicative functions. We don't just stay in one communicative function pattern. So make sure you're using many communicative functions. Step 3 that we talked about in part 1 was to make sure you're using a variety of environmental arrangements to promote communication, that you're not just doing everything for your students and therefore they have no need to communicate. So that's the quick wrap-up of part 1, and here we are at part 2. Really, to get to data collection, it is all about you. We, as communication partners, need to be consistent, because if we are not consistent, how then can we expect anything from our students to be consistent in which we can start to do data collection in? And communication is a two-part process. We need to be, as partners, doing things that encourage communication. It can't just be expected to be promoted from our students. You can't exempt their turn by talking all the time. I'm often known to be told, be saying to my staff that I'm working with, that you need to shut up in order for your students to have some airspace. We can't always be filling up airtime. They have to have time in which we pause in order for them to have time to think about what it is that they need to say, in order for them to be able to have time to communicate. Don't anticipate every need that they have. Otherwise, they have no need to request. They have no need to comment if you're doing all those things for them. People know the sabotage routine. As long as your students know what's expected or know what's coming next, then sabotage works. Sometimes sabotage works against you when you have kids that, get highly distracted, or they get highly, irate about things that get sabotaged. So you have to be careful about when you use sabotage. You need to make sure that you're using strategies when you do have the opportunity to slow down. Sometimes this isn't about slowing down throughout the day, because after all, you do have to get through your day at school. So you have to watch for when you're putting emphasis on. You have to be able to create silly situations for the kids where that they really react to that. And being silly promotes communication for them. Not every student does that work with. Make sure that you're modeling their use of symbols in whatever way that that's being used. If you're using a pod, if you're using an app, if you're using a device. As I think I've said before in part 1, if you want to have symbol talkers, you need to be a symbol talker too. Often you have one student who is the only student in your classroom that's using a device of some sort. Then you need to be a device user too. Model on their system. Create a duplicate system. Make sure maybe you might just have a copy of their overlay that you're modeling on. But you need to create that as a part of your natural part of your setting. Don't create just special moments for device talk. Don't just have a special language group for device talk. Oh, now we're going to have language group and everybody gets out their devices. No, that's not how you do implementation. Implementation is when your devices are out all of the time, throughout the day, that it doesn't just happen because the speech and language pathologist came in now for 20 minutes and now everybody's going to use their device. Teachers, and I'm a teacher, you have to have your students having your communication systems out all of the time. This is how they learn to use their communication systems, because this is their voice. It's not because you did a special show tricks. Say this, show me this. That's just a performance. Talking is not a performance. Talking is a part of their day, all day. Talking to their peers is the most important thing that you can do. Having them show that this is something that's expected all the time throughout the day. That you shouldn't lower your expectations. You should always be raising your expectations. Michael Williams is one of the best speakers in the area of how you should be using communication systems throughout your life. There's a great set of materials from the Alternative Speaking Group that's a part of Sarah Blackstone's website. All of those publications are now free for you. I've got the website here. Go and take a look at it. There's different focuses for each of the publications. Part of what we need to be doing is making sure that you're focused on what comes out of your mouth when your students are using their systems and when they don't use their systems. Making sure that you set up the environment for them to communicate is the most important thing to do. Pausing. Asking open questions, things that aren't just answered by yes and no. Giving suggestions or partial prompting so that it's a suggestion of what they could say during different parts. Modeling as next steps, requesting communication, and then providing full models. It's put in ECT, we use a least to most prompting hierarchy, because if you're always starting with full models, kids expect that full model. Now, if everything is spoken to some of our students, you have a lot of kids, especially if you're using this kind of prompting hierarchy, with kids who are partially intelligible kids, or you have kids that always repeat everything you say. Sometimes you can't always use spoken prompts. And so for those kids, you might use things like a flashlight or a little flashlight that cues in on their communication systems. You might use gestures. You might use pointing, to their systems. So you would use the same kind of least to most prompting hierarchy, but doing it without you speaking. So that's just the difference here in our least to most prompting hierarchy, is whether you speak or whether or not whether or not they speak. It's whether or not you speak is the difference between this spoken prompt hierarchy and the non-spoken prompt hierarchy. So let me go through this in a step-by-step basis. And this is also a measure of our data collection, at which level of the prompting hierarchy you need to go down to, whether or not, and that's what you mark on a data collection sheet. So whether or not just the typical environmental cue, and they spoke with their communication system by just you pausing at a natural cue, whether or not you needed to ask some kind of an open question. And make sure if you're using any kind of an open questioning technique that you're staying within the same kind of communication function, that you're not switching it up on them based upon the kind of message that they're communicating at the time. A partial prompt is a hint or a cue. You might want to use a little flashlight if you're using a non-spoken technique and give some little hints or cues of things that they could say at that time. But remember that this is about what they are wanting to be said. It's not necessarily, unless you're in an instructional where there is a right or a wrong, it's about figuring out what they might want to be saying or suggestions about what they might want to be saying. If they're still not saying something at that point, maybe they're not interested in saying something. That's always an option. Or if you're trying to get them to say more than one message, more than one word, and you want to suggest to them a phrase to say, to something more elaborate to say, we can go to this more of a command level where you suggest a longer message, or if they haven't communicated yet at this point, then you can suggest a longer message. If they haven't communicated yet, it's not that they're wrong by not communicating, but you can then suggest at a full model level where you're doing a hand under hand, or something that's least invasive, but you're giving them more of an idea of something to choose from. So that would be that kind of a 5-level prompting hierarchy. And remember that intentionality needs to come from the student. So you're just making suggestions along this path. Once they've communicated, you need to talk back to them. Here's your juice. If they've asked you for scissors during a craft project, you're giving them the scissors. What are you going to make? Please don't do rewarding. Good talking. Nice job. Good using your talker. Those kinds of rewarding messages, again, only promote that using an AAC system is about a performance. A lot of people go into what I call, that it was a game mode, and you're like, oh, good job. They throw a party because a kid hit their switch, or because they used their communication system, and they go into a dance and they do this little party, and then the kids wonder why, especially if you've done that at a preschool level or you've done that at elementary school, they wonder why people at middle school aren't throwing the party anymore. Don't throw a party for kids to use their AAC system. You should just talk naturally back to them. Give them a natural feedback to them. Just confirm that you got their message. If you want to, this is your opportunity to expand upon their message. Don't make them reconfirm. Oh, is this what you meant? Because sometimes kids will switch up their message because they'll think that you didn't like what they said, or that they gave you a wrong answer somehow. Unless you were in an instructional kind of situation, you just want to keep the conversation going. Too many of our augmented speakers get used to just doing a one message and then everything else goes on. You know, that there isn't this give and take conversation. This is why what we look at in step 5 is that we plan out the process, especially for people who are beginners in this, in the adult way of being a beginner, because not everybody in a classroom has experience with an augmented speaker, especially for our students that are in regular ed. Typically for a regular ed teacher, this is the first time they've ever had somebody with an AugCom device in their communication system, you know, within their classroom. And so a script can be a good starting point. It isn't an ending point. It's often just a place that you start. I look at it as a cheat sheet for the adults. It's a way to make sure that the adults understand that these are the kinds of things that somebody can say. This is a way to get them started. You don't do scripts all the time. You don't even have to always stick to the script. It also can be a source for data collection. In the handouts, you'll see that there's a suggested form that we use in ECT. On the left-hand column, this is where you put what the student is going to say. And again, they're only numbered as a suggestion. It doesn't have to be, you know, they do things in this order. The whole rest of the script is for what the adults say. If the student doesn't say a message, these are the suggested hierarchy of what an adult can say in a least to most way, that they don't immediately go and grab the kid's hand and slam it on the device, because the student's not going to learn that way. If you're always grabbing their hand and slamming it on the device, they don't take advantage of natural cues. One of our ECT trainers in Pennsylvania, Susan, has talked about that if all you ever do is tell a student exactly what to say, then all they're doing is following directions. You tell them what to say, or you grab your hand and put their hand on the device, all they do is follow your directions. They don't learn about natural cues and responding to natural cues. They don't learn about listening to people and responding in the environment, or commenting on things that are going on. Oh, somebody just walked into the room. Quite possibly I might greet them in some way. Or maybe I do want to ignore that person and I don't want to say something to that person. You know, or somebody did something great in our classroom and I want to give them, you know, some kind of an attaboy message that we do in our classroom. You want them to learn to respond to natural cues, not because some 35-year-old woman sitting beside them. I don't know why we always pick on 35-year-old women. We just do. I used to be one of those people. That because the person sitting beside them said, say this, touch this one, touch that one. Too often, that's why our augmentative communicators speak, because somebody told them, speak, and they spoke. This is not why you want your kids to talk. That's not the purpose. The purpose is the activity, the environment, and because you're using a purposeful prompting hierarchy. So you'll see also I've given you some examples, some different scripts of I think about 5 or 6 different activities. This is the Go Fish script that was one of the videos in the first part. And you'll see just again, you're looking at what a student might say through the activity. They don't have to say all of these messages. They don't have to say them. Some things naturally fall into place being said first and might be saying second, or might be something that's a closer. And then it's in a least to most kind of order. The things that are kind of our guidelines for creating scripts are the possible steps of the activity, that there are cues and prompts that are added and or taken away as needed, especially as you go throughout the school year. Patty King-DeBon talks about when she uses scripts with the classrooms that she's been working with in New York City, that often by November, if she started in September, often by November, they don't even need the scripts anymore. That people have, the adults have gotten used to the idea of how prompts and cues naturally come with students, that they don't even need to have the scripts anymore. So that's the way you're looking at using them with your staff. Some of the times my staff, as they're using the scripts, they might even be walking around with the scripts for the first month or two with them as they're getting used to it, and then they don't need them anymore. And again, you don't script everything out. It's really, as I said, a cheat sheet to get people started. You want to make sure in scripts that the kinds of verbs that you're using that are communicative verbs, that they're things like the student's going to ask, they're going to tell, they're going to say, not show, indicate, point to. These are physical kinds of words. You want to be using communicative words in these kinds of steps of the activities to really put the focus on that communication, and all communication has equal value. I mean, I can't say enough about that no matter how a student communicates, if they get their message across, that's really, really important. Again, you know, we try in the ECT to kind of burn this idea that the purpose for a student to communicate isn't because you put a device or you downloaded some really cool app last night and you put that iPad in front of them. That's not the purpose for a kid to communicate in your room. It's what are they doing in your room? Do you have meaningful activities for kids to communicate about? How do you set that environment? And are you using good partner interaction strategies? Those three things come together to help you create your data collection strategies. We often in ECT use video as a data collection source. We do baseline videos of activities in classrooms. How is the student communicating now? If they're using some kind of a communication device now, we videotape with that device now. We do not strip it away from them. How are they communicating in an activity? We use that same activity and we video in that activity segments approximately once a month, more often if we can. I often have teachers that will video that same activity, you know, every Monday or every Wednesday, especially if they have students that have health that fluctuates. So we won't be guaranteed that like every first Monday they'll be in school. So that way we'll always have a segment. Sometimes we're tracking the prompting hierarchy and we're charting on that prompting hierarchy, and we'll use the, you know, whether or not a student was at an open question level, whether they were at a partial prompting level, whether they were at, you know, a full model level. You know, if a student decides that they didn't want to say a certain message, we do not count that against them. You know, it's just a matter of when they did communicate, which level of a prompt that they were at, that they communicated at. And that kind of a chart might look like this example here. During a snack activity, the different steps, and then you'll see here were the different levels of prompting, and what you're looking for is for it to come down. So here, just within 1 month of data collection, the blue was the first time that they collected data. The student was at a partial prompt to a full model. And on the last data collection they had in this sample was the green. And it came down to that he was communicating just at environmental cues a couple open questions. The very last step of this activity was actually a physical step. It wasn't a communicative step, but he needed to throw things away at the end of snack. And this little guy, Aaron, really never wanted to be done with snack. And so it did take a full model to get to throw his things away at the end of snack. And I think some of you can probably relate to that with some of your kids. Here's another way that some people will track based upon messages that don't have to be said every time, and they track the messages rather than it step by step. They listed all the possible messages that could be said during a calendar time, and this was done on calendar based upon the idea that the student ran calendar rather than a teacher-run calendar. Some of you that might be doing News to You, and you're using, not News to You, using the unique calendaring, if you're doing any of the tracks in unique from the News to You organization, where the students run calendar time. This was what Mitchell did, and he ran calendar. And so there's lots of different questions that he could ask the group during that calendar time. They were also using this calendar time as they were trialing different communication devices, and they were using this as a data collection source on which device he was more independent with while they were deciding upon which device was going to be a better match for Mitchell. And that's a nice way of doing assessments, is using the same activity and different devices during the same activity. The student knows the activity. They know which messages to say during the activity. Those messages could be represented on the same device with different language systems even, if you're looking at different language or different symbol representation systems. So that's another thing that people have done. From one of our students a school year ago, this is something that they tracked during her snack time, and also to give you some other ways that people have looked during an ECT. This was a student that used a variety of communicative modalities, but they were also looking at some affect changes with her. She was more aware of her peers during snack time. She would also correct some of the things that she said based upon what peers said to her. She was less reliant on adults, which is a great outcome. And then also you found that adults changed their interactions based upon her strategies and her outcomes. So those are some great things that can come out of different data collection strategies. I also want to point out in another one of the data collection webinars that I've done that's on AbleNet University, that is a part of a strategy called communication enhancement process that is based upon the communication matrix. And if you're looking for other ideas for data collection, that webinar is also recorded on AbleNet University. So we'll give you some more ideas here. I love this T-shirt. It's one that comes out of the Arizona Educational Department with some of the teams that are going through their training this year. And I just had to share that to you as to give you some other ideas that achievement begins and ends with AT. So other things to do. Make sure you're giving information within a situation itself, that you're not just giving it in random order or given data based upon random situations. Make sure you're giving feedback based upon practice. Make sure you're modeling techniques. Make sure you're addressing, concerns, again, within the situation. For those of you that are doing professional development, addressing the concerns of the individuals that you're working with based upon the activities that they're doing and building upon their success. In ECT, the ECT trainers have a guide for review that's based upon the intervention within activities that we're trained to give feedback on. And what I want to do here is to give you, I want to pause a little bit and see if there are any questions. And then I want to do 2 more videos here that we didn't get to in part 1. So we'll see if there's any questions that Gloria's pulled out from the group. We've had some nice feedback, so thank you, everybody. And I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I'm going to move forward, and I want to show you. I know that we have had issues with people with videos, so we've put one video in here, and we'll see. It's loading right now. It takes a little bit to get things running. Sometimes videos, just so you know, play a little bit choppy. This is a video from Sharon's classroom with the student Brittany, who's learning, who's using her switch during a activity in her classroom where they're doing a bingo activity with environmental print. Brittany is a student who is visually impaired, so she's not able to see when they're playing the bingo, but she can ask somebody to look at her board and say, do I have that one? So the first item up here is Costco, and Sharon's the teacher is showing that to everybody.
You know what? Let's see, Britt. No, you don't have that one.
Brittany's message is, do I have that one?
Wait for the next one.
Of course, I've talked right through her saying that message.
Next one, guys. Look at your card. See if you have Home Depot. You know what? You do have that one. Good job, Britt. Yep. Take a look, guys. Go to the hardware store. You want to buy like some tools.
In the videos that I have, usually they're just focused on one student because that's what we have in video release, but there's 5 other kids around the room.
You do have that one, Brittany. Good job. Yeah, you have that one. Okay, Kmart.
And one of the great things here, a lot of people have a hard time with single switch users repeatedly hitting their switch, but because Brittany, this is an activity that they do often in she has learned not to repeatedly hit her switch. She's only used her switch once when the message gets called, you know, the first time that the new item gets put up, and then she'll wait for the second one.
Hold on, Britt.
Now, see, she has here now set it, and then Sharon just says to her, hold on.
Crossing, guys. Yeah, the mall. I know Brittany goes there. Sydney, I bet you've been there. Great Lakes Crossing.
Great Lakes Crossing? I heard that. Yep. You do, Mark. There you go.
I heard that. Great Lakes Crossing.
Sharon uses her good pausing strategies.
It's hard to see. Great Lakes
Let me know if
Crossing.
you need help.
Yep. Hold on.
She uses a partial prompt, yell if you need help.
I think you said
Brittany, do you need help?
you do have that. Thank you. I think you both said that.
You hear some other people asking and telling her, I have that. And then
Let's take a look, Britt.
Yes, you
Great
do.
Lakes Crossing.
she will use more of
Good. I know you like to go shopping.
an indication with her chin to ask her if to model with her that she needs to use her switch, and then Brittany will come over and repeat it afterwards. So it's just another example with students at different levels.
Sam's Club.
I'm going to stop this one.
Look, guys. I go to Sam's Club sometimes. Britt, let me know.
And we have time for me to share out. And we're going to go and watch Angel, who we didn't get to see last time. Angel's using a Dynavox. Again, based upon the bandwidth and the kind of device that you're watching from, we've had feedback last time that some people saw video, some people saw a still, some people saw video choppy. So we've tried to limit the number of videos that we're watching this time. Angel is a secondary student doing her job. Again, she uses a Dynavox. Angel is a student that also has natural voice. Some people, depending upon the number of interactions you've had with her, you might understand what she says, but the person that she goes into the office and works on her stocking supply job with doesn't have a lot of interaction with her. So that's why they've put her in this situation with somebody that doesn't understand her natural voice. Also, this is getting her ready. This is a part of her vocational experience or her pre-voc experience so that she can be used to working with people that don't understand her voice. So you'll see her first in her classroom and then going down the hallway and then into the office.
How will you let them know what they did? I'll just to walk around. So you need to go with the song.
You'll see a little bit of her paperwork that she's working from. Angel gets her supplies back in her room that she has to take down for her job. Nobody carries stuff for her.
Yeah, I saw a couple of
So just like start reading this with about 5 more.
It's hard to hear, but she is saying hi to some people as she goes by them. Now I'm going to move it forward here a little bit.
See this open line?
There you go.
Box of staples.
Wow.
Staples. We do have staples. 1 box. Check.
Staple remover. Staple remover.
Oh, no staple over here. Let's see. No staple remover.
They need to order one of those.
Very good, you're right.
And so they basically at this point go through a number of the items, and then that's whether or not they have to order things and not order things. All right, so once they've gone through their items.
You need to go to copy room.
Okay. Thank you.
So then she goes on to the next part of her job. She's got a couple rooms that she does. This same job in. Again, she greets people with her natural voice. Would be a little awkward at this point to have to use your Dynavox to greet people while you're carrying your supplies. We have done it where kids will use a rolling cart if they would need to do that so that they could have their supplies. So you see how social she is. I wanted you to get a couple shots of that. We saw Brittany, and then let me quit out of this and go back to see if we have any questions. We'll return. All right, so people were asking about videos. So yes, so we just showed some videos. Hopefully you were able to see some of those videos. And then about after the presentation, people can always contact me after the presentation. I'll give you that contact information. The typical environmental communication teaching sequence, if you're working with a trainer, whether you're doing that virtually or through a training, is to get the foundation information, whether you got it here on the webinar or do a webinar with a trainer. Happens at the beginning of the school year. You pick activities, not that a trainer gives you, but you pick activities right from your own schedule. That's the thing that's going to make it important, is that you look at the different kinds of communication. What are you working on with your students? You do your video of your pre-intervention samples. You complete scripts. You do a revision of your scripts. We look at sometime in the beginning, right around the beginning of what might be the winter months, the beginning of November-ish, getting feedback on what's going on, looking at what's going on with your communication system, what you're working on, starting to make sure that you're looking at what are you going to be collecting data on, getting feedback on those post-interventions. Sometime towards the end of winter, depending upon how, whether you're bringing a trainer in or you're doing things virtually, you might be getting feedback every month as things are going on. But then you're looking at doing a more formal feedback about how things are doing, moving things forward. Typically, we're focusing on 2 specific activities. But that's not the only time that your student has their communication system. Again, you want to have them to have access to their communication system throughout the day. But in order to practice the strategies, we're doing the videos on 2 specific activities throughout the school day. And then towards the end of the school year, we're wrapping up the formal part of ECT training. We do case study presentations. Teams wrap up their data collection. It's a way to celebrate what's going on during the year, to show what's happened throughout the year. We get next year's staff involved. If students are changing programs, it's a nice way of transitioning so we don't lose progress that's been made. We make carryover plans based upon that, create plans to happen during summer programming if that's going to be a part of a student's planning. I had mentioned last time too that a lot of it is spreading out the responsibilities. I use the roles and responsibilities matrix from Gary Cumley out of University of Wisconsin Stephen Point, and the work that Dr. Cumley's done where, and I do this throughout assistive technology planning, whatever needs to be done gets listed. The team members go across the top of this matrix. And then in Gary's work, each thing in the list needs to have an A and a B component. A is the first person who's responsible, and B is the backup person. And it's team members self-assigning, not one person assigning the work out, but that when team members self-assign, the work gets distributed more evenly, natural roles fall out. This is often then a nice plan that can get passed on to somebody with supervisory role that can follow through with what is and isn't getting done, rather than people, with nobody following through over what's getting done and not getting done. I'm going to check back to see if we have any other questions. Looks like we're doing pretty good. Please take a look at part 1 if you haven't had a chance to. And, for other information on ECT, we've got ECT trainers in Florida. We have people in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. We have ECT trainers in Wisconsin and Illinois and in Texas, people that are actually right on our conference with us here. And certainly I do ECT training. You can contact me. It's nice now because we're able to do things over the webinars. We can follow through with you virtually. And please do take a look at using a systematic process to implementation. It doesn't have to be flying by the seat of your pants anymore. You will get more implementation in your classroom day if you do things in a more systematic way. Be planful, be thoughtful as you're doing it. And, for heaven's sakes, don't just plop a device down in front of your kid and think that it's all about them. It is about you and about how planful you are with what you're doing. And it isn't, I would like to think that AAC is magic, but for those of us that have been in it for a long time, we certainly know that it isn't magic, and it isn't just the next new app is the next best thing. You do have to be thoughtful in what you do. And good luck, everybody, and thank you for joining us today.